So hi everyone, thanks for coming out. I am Chris Boucher. We're going to talk about my book, the original Bucky Lew, Basketball's First Black Professional. So I'll probably speak for like 20 minutes or so. If you have a question or an observation, feel free to interrupt me, shout it out. This will be better, the more interactive we can make it.
Okay.
All right, so it all started here in Marlborough in 1902. So it's the Lowell Pawtuckettville Athletic Club of the New England Basketball League coming down to play Marlborough's team. The game is held at Marlborough's old City Hall, which sadly is no longer standing. So Marlborough, of course, was an early hotbed of basketball. So the first basketball was played in Marlborough in 1894, just a few years after the invention of the game. So it came out from the Springfield Y to do kind of a training session. My understanding is they played 8-on-8. They probably had 16 people, so they just went 8-on-8.
Crowded court.
Yeah, they hadn't yet decided like how many should be on each
Oh
side.
my goodness.
And then Marlborough also had one of the first pro teams in the first pro seasons in 1898, and you can see this is the team of that era. My favorite player is obviously this guy right there, who might be Babe Kane. I'm going to try to run him down, but I think he's fairly well known in Marlborough. Has anyone ever heard of him before? Babe Kane? Okay. So looks like maybe his grandson, Bob Kane, is involved in the Struggle Society.
And by pro, you mean they got paid?
They got paid, yes. And so what happened is, so basketball started at the Y, became really popular really fast. The other members who didn't play basketball began to resent it because they felt like the gym was always taken out by basketball games. So a lot of the basketball players had to find their own place to play. They had to pay for those facilities, so they charged admission, thus they were professional. And then when the games became fairly popular, they got paid more and more. So that's the origin of it. All right, so why is this game special? Well, we have an 18-year-old black man, Bucky Lew, who is signed as a sub for this one game. He's playing for Lowell's Pawtuckettville Athletic Club. Previously, he was captain of Lowell's YMCA team, and that was one of the better amateur teams in the state. And I can read you a little bit about him from the book. So this is going to be a news report from the Lowell Courier-Citizen. And talking about that team, it says, their record was perhaps the best made by any team from the city, and they so far surpassed their opponents that large scores were always piled up every game. So they played other Ys, they also played some colleges. They had a game against the Massachusetts Institute of Technology that year as well. So the story goes on. The MIT boys were defeated, which was a surprise. It was their opinion that if Lowell could beat them, she ought to be able to win from any amateur team in the state. And in coming to this conclusion, the visitors were right. The season could not have come to a more glorious conclusion. One of the Lowell men, at critical stages of the game, was on hand with the sphere in his tight embrace to aid his fellows in piling up the score. That was Bucky Lew. So the rocket scientists at MIT concluded that he was one of the best players on one of the best amateur teams in the state. So back to the game. It's time for the tap, but there's a problem. So as I said, Lew was signed as a sub. One of his teammates is re-injured during warm-ups and cannot play. However, instead of the manager sending him out, he sends out 4 players to play the other team's 5. So you might ask why he would do that. So likely race was a consideration, right? At that point, basketball was segregated. You had white teams and you had black teams. They did not play each other. You did not have mixed teams. Violence might have been a factor as well. The manager might have been concerned for Lew's safety. So we had both rough players and rowdy fans in those days. Here's a quote from a reporter of the day who's just witnessed his first basketball game. And he says, the game combines all the exciting elements of boxing, wrestling, football, murder, and a house on fire. So it's a good time. So what happens? Well, the crowd puts up a fuss. The manager relents. Lew does get in the game. So he plays, and he plays well. Now, Marlborough, the home team, as you can see from one of the newspaper clippings, does win the game. However, Lew is called out in the sub-headline is playing well. The press notes his performance, but not his achievement. So there's no headlines. First black professional basketball player took the floor last night. Not sure why. but it wasn't. So what else happened? So Lew ends up signing for the season with that Pawtuckaville Athletic Club. You can see him there in the lower left. He becomes a fan favorite in Lowell and throughout the New England Basketball League. So in Lowell, the games were held at Huntington Hall. This no longer stands, like a lot of these buildings, was destroyed by fire long ago. But if you're familiar with Lowell, it's about near City Hall. What remains are the arches, and oftentimes there are some trains parked in that area as well. It was set up similar to North Station in Boston, where you had trains underneath and then a large hall up above. So the capacity was 2,000, and for big games, they would fill that. So that was a lot of fans for those days. The Boston Braves, that very year, their home opener only had 1,600 fans. Now, of course, the Red Sox had much more. The Braves weren't quite as popular, but still an interesting comparison. So, as you can imagine, Lew did take his share of grief. Here's a list of the injuries and indignities that he suffered. So in one game, he was kicked in the stomach and had to leave. Another, he gashed his hand on the fencing that used to surround the courts, the wire fence that they used. Needed stitches, had to leave that game. He often dislocated his shoulders. So in researching a book, I spoke to his granddaughter, Wendy Johnson, and she said that later in life she could remember him oftentimes rubbing his elbows. So he frequently dislocated his shoulders as well, and that seems to be something that bothered him later in life. Of course, there are indignities as well. He was once called his manager's colored valet, code word for slave. Crowds tried to shut him off the floor. He once was denied lodging, little typo there, denied lodging in New Hampshire. So after a game, he had to walk in the middle of a January night from one New Hampshire town 10 miles down the road to the next one to find a place to stay. So sad story. Silver lining in that, the team that he was traveling with also made that trip with him, but still they had to walk that 10 miles in freezing temperatures to get to a place where they could stay. Also, one team refused to play him, and we'll get into that more in a bit. Despite all of this, Lew was known as a clean and skillful player. So one of his teammates later in life said that as a black man, times were often rough for him, but he never got ruffled or angry. I did speak about how the game was rough in those days. Fistfights were common. However, Lew never threw a punch. So he was known as kind of someone who would play within the rules. Now, he played a physical style too. I read that in one game he had 10 fouls, which is kind of hard to imagine, but sometimes they would lift the foul limit. So instead of like the 5, you get an amateur ball these days, or the 6 in the pros, they would go beyond that. But even considering that, 10 fouls was a lot. So he would give it right back, but he did it within the context of the game. He also became the top defender in the game, and while PAC that year did not have a great team, when their season ended, no one blamed him for it. I can read you quickly an account from the Sun about how that season played out for them. The headline goes, Bucky Lew, a PAC star. It says, Bucky played his man as he was never played before, and the great goal thrower never got a look in at the basket. Lew's work was cheered repeatedly by the audience. And Lew was the liveliest man on the floor, and by the way, the chap who did all the playing for the PACs. Lew certainly is a wonder. So that season ended on a disappointing note, but no one blamed Lew.
So how old was he at this time?
18 when he signed. So he was born in 1884, when he signed in 1902, he was 18 years old.
Okay, and PAC stands for?
Pawtuckaville Athletic Club.
Okay.
So Pawtuckaville was a neighborhood in Lowell that was largely French-Canadian. It became populated, people came down from Canada to work in the mills, and actually that's my family connection to the story too, which I can get into later if anyone is interested in it, but the Lews were there first. Actually, Bucky Lew's great-grandfather was a Revolutionary War veteran. After the war, he bought some land in what is now Lowell, and so the family was there really before Lowell was Lowell. Then later, other people came and filled in around him. And just, I guess, to conclude the story, so I became interested in basketball because I had read a book about early basketball, which made it clear to me that the game was ethnic in origin. You have kind of like neighborhood teams that started, so they used it to both like build their community and then later to assimilate into the larger community as they competed with other folks. And so I read a book by a gentleman called Douglas Stark about a Jewish basketball team in Philadelphia. I decided to look into my own family's background, which is French Canadian Lowell. I found that there was a team in that neighborhood of Pawtuckaville, which was interesting to me. That was my family's neighborhood. But what was more interesting is that team, Pawtuckaville Athletic Club, was the team that signed the first black player. Now, 53, been in Lowell about 50 years, probably been a basketball fan about 40 years, and I had never heard of Lew before. I looked into him, I found that he was really treated more as a footnote than anything else. Like any book you read about him will be like in an anthology, it's just a couple of pages. He hadn't been given that kind of full-length book treatment before, so I set out to do that. All right, so back to that season. So Marlborough actually wins the championship that year. So they finished first in the first half of the season, which meant that they would move on to the championship. What they did is they broke the season into two halves. The winner of the first half would play the winner of the second half. So even though Marlborough dipped significantly in the second half of the season because of that strong performance in the first half, they moved on to the finals and they defeated South Framingham. So they were the champions of that year in the New England Basketball League.
Did you run across anything that like specified or gave some indication of where these different teams were, what their ethnicity was for each of the different teams? Like,
Yeah, so in Lowell, you had an Irish team, which is called the Burks, and that was the PAC's kind of primary competitors. And then you had the PAC, which was like the French-Canadian team. As far as some of the other ones, I'm not sure of their origins. Around this period, it started to change.
Mm-hmm.
So even though that was the origin of the New England League and those kind of teams that came about, as the game grew more popular and people started to pay to play, fans started to pay to watch it, then the managers and the owners of the team started to sign players from outside. So there's a New England League, but we started to have players from New York, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey who started to come in as well. So during this time, this first kind of 10 years of basketball, is where the game goes from kind of its ethnic beginnings to more of, I guess you could say, a cosmopolitan thing. So that's really what's kind of staggering about how unknown Lew is, because the New England League was recognized as a major league of its day. So I'll go through it at the end when we talk about my sources, but Bill Hillman, who has a website on early basketball, worked for the Basketball Hall of Fame, and he acknowledges the New England League as a major league of basketball, even that far back. Okay, so you might wonder at this point if that's it for Lew, right? So he had some success in the New England League, but also as we went through, took a share of grief as well. Lynn, did you have a question before we move on? No. But of course, he kept going, right? All right, so in the second year, he now moves from Lowell to Haverhill. So not exactly sure what happened there. Gray had re-signed all the PAC players, but then he signed a bunch of other players from out of town too. So Lew likely read the writing on the wall and asked for his release, and then he signs with Haverhill. Part of it, I wonder, might have been jealousy. So if you remember from the early kind of snapshots that I showed you about Lew's first game, there was one picture that appeared next to it, and that was Jimmy Gray. That was Lowell's manager. In the last game, where we talked about Bucky Lew's emergence as a PAC star, even though that game was a loss to end the season, he had become the face of the team. So I do wonder if there was some jealousy at work here, where the manager, who was kind of a PR hound, resented the press that Lew was now getting. But it turns out to be okay, because Lew lands in Haverhill. This is one of two super teams in the New England League. So Lew is one of the few Massachusetts-based players on this team. Most of these other gentlemen are from New York, including the tall guy in the back, who's in the Hall of Fame right now, Ed Wagner. He's one of the few players from that era that's in. The other super team plays for Natick, and they're made up of New York, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey players, and we'll talk more about them later. So these two super teams are set to face off in Haverhill, and everyone's looking forward to the matchup. We have Harry Huff, who's the best player of his day, who's called the Little Wizard, and I can read you the scouting report on him. He's averaging about 15 points a game, which is a lot in those days because the best teams only scored 30. So they've only been playing basketball for about 11 years. They're still kind of figuring out how to shoot. They didn't shoot jump shots. They kind of shot funny looking two-handers and set shots. They're working on that. The basketball also, you can tell, is kind of huge. It looks kind of like a beach ball. The laces were on the outside, almost like a football. So you can imagine trying to like dribble this or trying to get a friendly roll off the rim when you have like the seams on the outside.
I
So a
wondered
couple
if we
factors.
just, I don't know if you've seen on the History Channel, they have a series, How's It Made? And I saw a whole thing on basketballs,
Yeah.
baseballs, and footballs.
Oh, nice.
It was on about 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Right.
It was so interesting how many changes in the size of the basketball. It was the size of a soccer ball at one time.
Yeah, that's what they start with.
The
Yeah.
shape, you
Right.
know, the whole thing.
Yeah.
So if you haven't seen it, check it out, because it would further increase your knowledge of the field that you've dedicated so much time to.
Yeah.
And I know they talked about footballs and the dimples to give better grip. But I think, and I can't remember exactly whether they also touched on basketballs and having the same type of dimples because they're first using soccer balls.
Yeah, yeah, I'll have to look for that. So I'm generally familiar with the origins, but that sounds like they'll break it down. So yeah, they did, there was, when they started playing 1891, there was no basketball. So
Right.
they used what was called an association football, which I think was just a soccer ball, right?
Mhm.
And then when they had a basketball, it was much bigger.
Mhm.
It was weird and kind of lumpy. It had the seams on the outside. It was kind of hard to handle. Sometimes it had like a knuckleball, like movement in the air. There were no backboards in those days. So it was just a rim that was attached to a pole that was hanging from the ceiling. The court was a lot smaller. It was usually to be like 60 by 30, so people were all over each other. It was much harder to shoot in those days. All right, so quick scouting report on Harry Huff. So this says, Harry Huff was the most influential player on and off the court during the first dozen years of pro basketball. He possessed incredible agility and speed. He was unequaled in his ability to break free for a clear shot. If a defender played him tight, he would drive around him for an easy layup. If the defender backed off to defend against the drive, he would show off the fact that he was one of the best set shooters of the era. Also, on the court, he was an extremely intense, high-strung figure who raged at referees, opponents, and even teammates at times. Owners and managers found Huff an equally prickly personality who endlessly battled for a higher salary. So that's Harry Huff, again, leading scorer in the league. And of course, Bucky Lew, best defender, still the only black player. So what happens? Instead of a showdown, we have a letdown. So the Natick players say that they will not play against Lew. They say that they are from the South. They're from Pennsylvania and New Jersey, but they say they're from the South, and it's against their culture to share the court with a black man. So they refuse to play while he stays on the court. So he, by his own choice, sits, and the game goes on. However, after that, the league meets. They side with Lew. They say there will be no color wall in basketball. If Natick tries that again, they will be bounced from the league. And the season plays out. One thing I just want to jump back to real quick. While Natick said they were from the South, the players said they were from the South, that's why they wouldn't play against Lew. The press speculated that something else was at work. So a newspaper in Waterbury, Connecticut said that Huff quit because he was afraid to measure his abilities with the colored boy. Bucky Lew is one of the best backfield players in the country. And the Globe agreed. It said that Lew was credited with being the only able opponent for Harry Huff.
And what year again was this about?
This is now 1904,
Okay.
heading into 1905.
Mhm.
So it's Lew's third year in the New England League. All right, so catching up a little bit. So I said Haverhill and Natick are the two best teams. They're set to face off in the finals. The league said there's no color wall, so Natick is going to have Harry Huff and his teammates at Natick are going to have to face Haverhill. Almost. If you remember Jimmy Gray from Lowell, he somehow arranges for Natick to play his team before Haverhill plays Natick for that championship. Not something you could get away with today, but in those days, the contracts for the regular season and the postseason were different. So before all the players signed up for the postseason, he ran his own kind of season series. Now Haverhill, as I had mentioned, most of their players are from New York. So they just don't want to sit around out here for a week and wait. So they organize some exhibition games. And guess what? In one of these games, Lew is hurt. He dislocates his shoulder. He is unable to play as he typically would in the finals. Natick wins it. So Lew only plays about 2.5 games. He's not himself. Natick wins the championship in 7 games. Then, perhaps even worse, after the season ends, Lew's teammates from New York go back to New York. They gather up some of their friends from the area. They go on a Midwestern tour. They beat the team that won the Olympic trials in 1904. So they now have the right to call themselves the world champions. And you have to wonder if Lew was not hurt, if he had not dislocated his shoulder in that weird series that Lowell's manager had arranged with Natick before the actual championship, he might have had both a New England championship and a world championship that year.
What's with the child in the middle?
It's weird, right? So they had like mascots in those days. So the PAC picture I showed you, they had like 2 pit bulls. Some of the teams had kids. So this child's, I don't know, 8 or 10 years old. He's like their mascot. If we go back a little bit, we can see that Haverhill had a child too. A scared looking child. So I don't think he's having a good time over there. He must have seen Harry Huff walk by, I'm not sure. So yeah, I don't know why they did that. It might have been like a water boy, like things like that.
Coach's son.
Maybe.
No, the coach looks.
He kind of resembles him a little bit. And the other thing that's odd about this picture is look how big that basketball is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So yes, Lew missed out on those championships. And if he had been a world champion, he might have been on the same level as his hero, Major Taylor, but didn't happen. So now you might ask, is that it for Lew? So the New England League now folds. He's had some success, but he's had his rough patches as well.
Major Taylor?
Yes, Major Taylor. Have you heard of Major Taylor?
No.
Oh, you should talk to Lynn after this. So he's a world champion bicyclist. I think probably the first black world champion in history. Maybe 1899 did he win? Do you want to talk about him real quick, Lynn? This might be good for the audience as well.
Yeah, world champion 1899, they called him the Worcester Whirlwind. A lot of parallels, almost every slide. There's something about Major Taylor that's kind of parallel. He was about 6 years older than Bucky Lew. And what I learned just this week from Chris is that Lew raced bikes before he got into basketball.
Oh.
And Chris sent me a newspaper clipping where the newspaper called Bucky Lew the Major Taylor of Lowell.
Oh.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I hadn't heard of Major Taylor either until I heard of Bucky Lew and started reading the old newspapers. And the first time he appeared in the papers is when he was called Lowell's Major Taylor. So that was really interesting to me. And if you look it up on YouTube, there is a relatively new Major Taylor documentary. I think it came out in the last week or so. That's like really interesting. But yeah, another kind of forgotten black historical figure, I had to say. So look for that on YouTube. All right, so was that it for Lew? No, of course not. So the New England League folds, so he forms his own team. So he puts together Lew's Lowell 5. They travel around New England playing games, first by train and then later by car. So they're playing independent teams. They'll just travel around and play whatever basketball team is there. Now what's really interesting about this period is that in the teens and 20s, there was a KKK revival in New England. We have half a million members of the Klan in New England. And of course, the Klan hates blacks, Catholics, and Jews. That's basically Lew's roster. So he's a black man, he's running the show, he's still playing. A lot of his players are Irish or French Canadian who are Catholics. He also had a Jewish player, Benjamin Hurwitz, that played for him. So this is pretty remarkable that he's doing that in this time. Birth of the Nation is out, the Klan is like hot, people are joining it, and he's running around with these folks. Impressive. What else? He also plays in the band, so he was also a violinist. In the story, in those days, they would have basketball and dancing events to try to, I think, bring in more people. So there'd be a game, and then there'd be a dance afterward. I'm not exactly sure if this is where he met his wife, but the story is that she first kind of fell in love with him, is when she saw him play the violin. And the story is that, according to the family, she was more impressed with his musical ability than his basketball skills. And that's a Fitchburg connection. Lynn and I were speaking about this earlier. His wife's family was from Fitchburg. So that's that. Lew does get his championship in Vermont in 1907. So now he's playing with the Springfield Athletic Club. You can see him in the back left there. Here he becomes a marquee name and a billboard attraction. So here's an ad from one of the newspapers of the day. You can see the last line in there is telling people to come out and see the original Bucky Lew. And that's the phrase I used for the title of my book. So he was a very popular figure in Vermont. I'll read you a few of those quotes. All right, so here's one about his first game up there. It says, the old axiom that a new broom sweeps clean was clearly demonstrated by the work of the reorganized company team. The original Bucky Lew was there, and he did some original stunts in dribbling and passing that have seldom been surpassed on the local floor. It goes on, with less than half a minute to play and the score tie, Bucky Lew sent the ball squarely through the net, winning for his team one of the closest and most exciting games ever seen here. Lew was the particular star and the idol of the audience, a wonderful player, fast and resourceful. He scored 16 points, and his blocking and dribbling was the best seen here in many a day. Okay, so what else? So he's also basketball's first executive. So in 1950, the men who were behind the New England League tried to revive it. They need a team in Lowell, since it's a popular spot for basketball. They asked Lew to run that franchise. So he had retired that winter because he broke a leg in a game in New Hampshire. But he comes out of retirement, signs himself as a sub, probably saved himself a few bucks. He's the sixth man. One of his other players ends up leaving. He becomes a starter. He actually finished that year in the top 10 in scoring in the league. And Marlborough also has a team in the league in that year. You can see them quite a bit ahead of Lowell in the standings, unfortunately. But so he was also coming down here for those games as well. And there's more. So he's also the first black coach of a major college, I believe. So he coached at Lowell Textile Institute, which is now UMass Lowell, in 1922. That's now a Division I basketball team. They are second or third in their conference. So it's possible if they win their conference, they'll end up in the NCAAs and March Madness, which would be nice. I know this is hard to read, but I can just read the caption that I've highlighted there to kind of tell you about him a little bit. So it's Harry Bucky Lew, the newly appointed coach, took charge of the team and immediately started to iron out the rough places in the teamwork. Lew is one of the best professional players produced in Lowell for many years. And he's not done yet. He also is probably the first authority figure. So in 1923, Lowell starts a pro league. They ask him to be the head referee, and he accepts. So what's interesting about this, you can see the story announcing the formation of the new league. It talks about who the president is and the other officers in the league, but only one man's picture accompanies the story, and that's Bucky Lew's. So it just shows you the regard with which he was held in Lowell for his basketball skills and knowledge and demeanor. So now you might ask, is that it for Lew? And this is our last segment. Any questions or observations before we move on?
No, it probably isn't.
I don't know, it might be. So he's not in the Hall of Fame somehow. They do acknowledge his status as the first black professional player. The family has a letter, there's one in a museum in Lowell as well. I don't know if they know the full list of his accomplishments though. I don't know if they know all of this. Like, much of this was news to me when I started digging into it. Recently, UMass Lowell dedicated a plaque in his honor. It was news to them when I pointed out his status. So I do think that a lot of these things that were well documented back in the papers of his day had been forgotten. So maybe, you know, as a result of the book and talks like this and people just talking more about Lew, that might change. We'll see.
Is he acknowledged in Springfield?
So that's where the Basketball Hall of Fame
Yeah.
is. So they had sent a letter to the family acknowledging that he has that status as the first black professional player,
But nothing,
but he's not inducted as a member.
you think you could get in touch with someone like Cousy, who's still alive, but he's
Yeah.
what, 96,
Mhm.
97? And, he was Canadian, and
For
he
Canadian,
went,
yeah,
and he was Holy Cross, wasn't he?
Mhm.
yeah. Worcester,
And
yeah.
I knew him when I was in high school, and he was coaching BC at the time. He had
Okay.
retired from the Celtics.
Yeah,
And my girlfriend's brother was Terry Driscoll, who
Sounds
ended up
familiar.
playing, he went to BC. He was captain of the team when Cousy coached the team.
yeah,
And then he was drafted by the Minneapolis Lakers
okay.
when Jabbar was there, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, at the time, when he was coaching at BC, he lived in Revere for a long period of
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
So he's a local.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you appeal to someone like him with that kind of clout, now that Russell is gone and Heidson's gone. I wonder what he could do.
How does the Hall of Fame work? Is there like a board that votes on nominees, or?
So I don't know the full details. My understanding is that right now, Lou's most likely route would be what you suggested, a player who's in there now, like nominating him. Sad to say, there used to be an early African-American Pioneers Direct Elect Committee that could just like take people that they had researched and nominate them directly for a vote, but the Hall has disbanded that committee just this past year. So it's, and Lou was on the list, he was on their eligible list. The committee only existed for about 10 years or so. They probably put in about a dozen players. They no longer exist. So it would take someone like Cousy or Kareem Abdul-Jabbar or someone who's like in to nominate him, it looks.
But
at
if you
this point.
think that Cousy is like 96,
Yeah,
he probably remembers him. You know what, or at least the recent history of him. If he was the first referee in 23 and the first college coach, I would think that, that was only 15 years ago for Cousy when he got into basketball.
yeah, I mean, maybe, or he could read the book, right? But I think
Or if he
Cousy
read
was
the-
probably
send him a
Holy
copy
Cross in
of
the
the book.
50s, right? Because he started with the Celtics in the 50s, and then Russell came in the
Yeah.
early 60s,
But
and then
don't
they really
forget, he
took
was
off.
at Holy Cross and a big
Yeah,
star
yeah.
even before that.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying,
Yeah,
send
you-
him a copy of your book
Yeah,
and write him a little note.
yeah, it can't hurt. I
Yeah.
mean, supposedly Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is about to read the book. A friend of a friend has like an
Kareem
in
would
with
be
him,
good.
it's gonna be in his hands, so. Somebody, yeah.
What, I remembered what my question was. What was Lowell Textile at the time? Was that a post-secondary, was that a college?
It was, yeah. It was like engineering, it was textile engineering, because they had the mills, which were cotton mills and woolen mills. As best I can tell, it was how to like build the machines and like hook them all up or whatever, but yeah, it was a college, yeah.
Was there women's basketball back then?
There wasn't then, but it looks like women have been playing basketball just about as long as men have. They played under a lot different rules.
Yeah.
Either schools nominated them or like factories. I did a talk once in Sanford, Maine, and as preparing for that research, I found out that there were a couple of mills that sponsored women's teams and they played each other. The rules were a lot different, and actually talking to Lou's granddaughter, Wendy, she never liked basketball because they played under what called the Iowa rules. So basically, you could only dribble once. You couldn't really like run around. It's
And
almost like you
women
had two
couldn't
different
cross
half.
the court.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I guess only like guards could go beyond the half-court line. And when I was in high school, at the beginning of the 70s, they still said that it was, you think of Title IX now.
Right.
They,
that's
did-
my
they thought it
generation,
would
yeah.
fatigue women if
Yeah.
you were a forward or a center to cross the center line.
Yeah. Did you play?
Yeah, I did, intramural, yeah. I have two other suggestions. Tatum, of course, and the book too,
Yeah,
but Brown is very political.
Yeah, I tried to get in touch with him through his foundation, it's called like the Seven Foundation or something, but one of the things is, I'm just sending an email to like a random mailbox, you know?
Yeah.
It would be helpful to meet someone who knows
Well,
someone.
Ron strikes me as an intellectual, and he does a
Yeah,
lot of work.
yeah, I feel like if it's got to him, he'd be interested in it.
Yes,
But someone of that stature is hearing a dozen requests a day, you know? But hopefully, if more people talk about this, and this recording is like a huge hit and goes viral, maybe Brown will see it, or just more people talking about it will help, I don't know. Like Major Taylor was forgotten before he was remembered, right?
Right.
So hopefully Bucky Lew can follow that same path. All right, so there's all the accomplishments, very impressive, right? And then there's another one I think that he doesn't get credit for that he should. So, I think he also influenced the full integration of Major League sports, which didn't happen until a generation after he stopped playing. So this basically happened in the 40s and then the 50s, right? So the local men who ran the team that took the first steps towards integration would have heard about Lew because they were following his exploits as high schoolers. So the president of the Nashua Dodgers had 2 black players in 1946. That's the same year Jackie Robinson was in Montreal. He wasn't in the US. He played with Brooklyn in 47. So the first black players in the Dodgers organization were in Nashua. And then the Celtics drafted the first black player in 1950. So both of these are local men. They were kind of like sports-obsessed high schoolers when Lew's career was winding down. So they would have been reading about his exploits in the papers of the day. And so I'm convinced that they were confident that the fans would accept the black players on their teams because they remembered what a beloved figure Lew was back in his day and how he had been accepted. And even further than that, the fans supported him, but his peers had also recognized him as a leader. So I'm convinced that this is yet another tie that would help Lew get to that next level and into the Hall of Fame as a full member.
Can you talk a little bit more about the acceptance when you said like that, you know, it had, Lew showed that the fans would accept a black player?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, what were the crowds like? Were the fans all white? Was the crowd integrated?
So I think the fans were mostly white, right? I mean, the black population of New England about this time is like 1%. Right, which explains maybe why Lew was the only player around. I understand there was also a player in New York that played pro in the 19-teens, but didn't go outside of New York, probably for safety reasons. So it's not, I can't go on YouTube and watch a game and see what the fan experience is like. So Massachusetts wasn't really segregated like that. So I suspect that there was a mixed crowd. However, it would have been predominantly white, for sure.
And then going back to the idea that he was accepted, he was a fan favorite, that they
Yeah.
liked him. Do you think that was linked to some of the personality traits that you mentioned, that he didn't get ruffled or angry?
I think so. So, I mean, from what I understand, Jackie Robinson was kind of the same way. Like he understood that in order for him to succeed and open up that path for other people going forward, he would have to go through a lot and deal with it like within the rules of the game. So as I said, fistfights were common in basketball in those days. Very often games kind of devolved into fistfights or riots, and no one was suspended from the game. It would be a foul, and then they would kind of move on when they restored order. But even despite that, he never threw a punch. I read about several times where he kind of squared off, but then either teammates or a referee would intervene, and no fight took place.
Well, I think in baseball, you had the Negro Leagues, and they were playing a much better, more robust, exciting form of baseball than the major leagues were. And that was one of the major drivers for owners to start looking at the Negro League players in order to, because they wanted to win, and they couldn't win with the personnel that they had in living in a segregated system. I don't know what the basketball world was like, because as you mentioned, in the late 1800s, 1890 to so forth, you basically had the end of Reconstruction, where during Reconstruction you had a black member of the Senate. You had about 5 to 10 or 15 congressmen elected to the House of Representatives. And then in the late 1800s, you had a major pushback, and the advent of Jim Crow and Birth of a Nation, the Ku Klux Klan, and major swath of lynchings across the country,
Yeah.
not only in the South, but in the North as well, plus marches as well, and marches up here in New England for the Klan.
Yeah, yeah.
So I don't know what the basketball world was like if they had developed segregated leagues throughout the country, and to what extent that permeated not only into, you know, the Philadelphia area, the New York area, and up into Boston.
Yeah, so actually, to talk a little bit about that, I meant to jump back, but I can show you one of the early slides. So the state of basketball in those days was largely segregated. So you had the black teams and you had the white teams. You didn't have mixed teams.
And I don't think it was just purely like two-dimensional, black and white. I think, you know, my guess would be that it was very much also Irish, Italian, French Canadian. So there were different levels of that, and my guess would be that it permeated sports.
Yeah, and I wonder about the degree, because, so Lou played in New England, right?
Mhm.
So he didn't travel to the Midwest. It would have been interesting if he was healthy for that World Championship tour in 1905, if he would have made it and what that experience would have been like, because that would have been different. And as you mentioned, Jim Crow spread. It wasn't just the South. After Reconstruction failed, Jim Crow spread, right? So Lou, I guess, was lucky in the sense that Lowell was not segregated. So he went to school and it was integrated. He played at the Y and it was integrated. He was the one who integrated it, but there was no one was blocking it. And then he played with the pros as well and integrated that.
I wanted to ask about the Y also, because the YMCA was huge in Major Taylor's life. He was really stung as a child in Indianapolis to not be allowed to go to the Y with his white friends. And then when he moved to Worcester, he was allowed to train at the Y, and he got a lot of his physical training advances happened there. And then so he was a lifelong benefactor of the Y. Often on the road, we couldn't get lodging because of his skin color. The Y was one place where he could stay. And at the end of his life, when he was kind of, his fortune had dwindled, he lived in the Wabash Avenue YMCA in Chicago at the end of his life. So the Y was a thread throughout his life, and I was curious to know more about the YMCA team where Lou got his start.
Yeah, so he integrated it. I mean, he was the first black player, but no one blocked him. He was welcomed. He was a captain for at least the last 2 years of their kind of championship teams. But if I recommend another great book besides the original Bucky Lew, The Black Fives, if you've heard of this, goes through a lot of that history. And it's really like an encyclopedia, and it talks about it. And it does talk about how in New York, the Ys were segregated. And in Washington, D.C., the same way. So there were some Ys that were integrated and some that were not. So it doesn't seem like there was a national policy. I'm not sure why that is. But I know that the YMCA in Lowell was welcoming of Lou, and he was able to play there. So he did not go to high school. He went to work right after the 8th grade. His family had a dry cleaning business, and he went to work there. His siblings, who came later, did go to high school. So that's why he played at the Y. He was on the employee boys team, so that was kind of his outlet. So at 14, he's working, but he plays at the Y, and that's really where he's serious about that and his other sports and strength training too. If you saw some of the pictures, you can see how dramatically he kind of bulks up year after year. So here he is, 1902. My cover image was from 1901. He has biceps. Didn't have that earlier. Let's see, look how big he is in this picture. So he's spending a lot of time in the Y doing strength training, because you can see he's really building up his body.
Did he ever try to go back and further his education?
No. And I don't know why or why not. So his family did have that business, so he pitched in and ran that. So kind of amazing in its own right. So I think they opened that in like the 1880s. So this is a black-owned family business in like the 1880s. And so he helped run that, and that was just what they did. They did end up moving to Springfield during the Depression because Lowell was not a great place to be. Even though the family didn't work in the mills, there was really no longer any money to support their business. So they relocated to Springfield during the Depression. That's where he spent like the last 35 or so years of his life. Very ironic, he's buried about 1.5 miles from the Hall of Fame. He did like a short training run for him to get down there.
And where did you find the granddaughter?
She lives in Milton, so Wendy Johnston. So I talked to her, Milton, Mass.
Oh,
So I
Milton.
spoke to her a couple times in researching the book. And if we go ahead real quick, we've had a couple of honors for Lou in Lowell recently, and there they are. And she has, so there's a Lou Family Square, which is the site of that dry cleaning business. This has been there for quite a while. The Lowell, UMass Lowell, a couple weeks ago, put up this plaque of him before they honored Lou before a game. In late February, his granddaughter came out for that. And then in November of last year, Lou was honored with a plaque at the YMCA where he kind of kicked off his amateur career. So that's some of the history of it, and his granddaughter came off that too. So she's involved, she read the book. First I had to make sure I had her permission to write it, right? Because this isn't my story, right? This is Bucky Lew's story, it's the family story. But I felt good about it because my interest was, that's my family neighborhood, and no one had written the book yet. So she was happy about that, liked the book, and has been involved in these kind of ongoing activities that we have. Which brings me to Marlborough. So the site of that first integrated pro basketball game no longer stands, but it is a site, like the old town hall is not there. Seems like that might be a fitting place for a plaque to honor Lou, but I'm not sure. I made at least one call and haven't heard back. Maybe I could get in touch in the Historical
Well,
Society.
they had an article in the Community Advocate, I think that's the name of the paper.
Yeah, a few months back.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that basically showed the building where the Flying Dreams cafe is now.
Yeah.
Or whatever they are, brew pub.
So it is, yeah.
And it used to be Dino's back in the day.
Yeah.
And it said that building on the second floor was a gymnasium.
Yeah. I told them that, and unfortunately I've learned I was wrong.
Oh.
So working with the library in Morgan here, she sent me some papers of the day, and I found out that first game actually happened in the old city hall here in Marlborough. Then, a few weeks later, that burnt down.
Yeah, that's where the library used to be, and that's
Okay.
how Carnegie got involved, because somebody from Marlborough wrote a letter saying that their library in the town hall had burned down, and that's how Carnegie invested the money to build the original library here.
Okay.
We
Okay.
went on the tour when this part opened, and that's how I learned that piece.
Okay, okay. So yeah, so that's like December 1902. Then Marlborough played the rest of the games in the old theater, which I thought was the building where the brew pub is, but before this talk, I went over there and was talking to folks. So that building still stands that I thought was the old theater. It's like an office building, and they have the
Yeah.
brewery in there. However, talking to an attorney who works there, who's kind of a local historian, he told me that the Opera House, where they had boxing and basketball games, was actually what's now the parking lot right next to that building.
Oh.
So sorry about that. I was just working with the information I had at the time. But anyway, that's there. So yeah, a couple historic sites that are not, you know what, if there was a plaque there, then we would know. I wouldn't have to speculate and spread misinformation, right? So that'd be nice if that comes of this.
Something that's helped raise Major Taylor's profile, that's a little bigger than a plaque, is murals. Murals are really popular right now, and there are murals in a bunch of cities. Worcester even has a mural festival every year. Well, they didn't have it last year, but they get like internationally known artists from all over compete. They'll line up a whole bunch of walls. This year we're going to do these 10 walls, and they all get painted within a week, and there's a lot of other events and stuff happening at that time. And those are, that's, a plaque is only so noticeable. A mural is a little more noticeable. There's also a warehouse in Worcester where they put, these are not painted murals, but like some kind of fabric window covering on this giant warehouse that you can see from the highway and from the Holy Cross football stadium, and they covered each window with different icons of Worcester. So Major Taylor is up there next to Cousy.
Oh, nice.
Wow.
Nice.
So I'm not sure how all the murals of Major Taylor have come about without our doing. But when people, the story sells itself. When people find out,
Yeah.
Right.
I think you're going to be getting the same reaction that we always got to Major Taylor, which was, how come I never heard about it? How come I didn't
Can
know
your
about this?
presentation get on cable TV?
Yeah, I think it will be, yeah.
Okay.
Alex is recording this right
That's
now, yeah.
Okay.
So as far as the murals go, so I am meeting in a couple of weeks with some folks in Lowell, City Hall. And so that would seem like something that could be suggested. I know that I drive by UMass Lowell all the time. And there's a mural on the research reactor they have there. It's like a hermit crab. It's like, that should be Bucky Lew, showing off some explosive move. Like, come on. So I'm not saying we have to repaint the hermit crab, but there's plenty of places in Lowell where you could do a Bucky Lew mural on the side, like an old mill building, or nearby where he played, or put him a statue. It sounds like a mural is probably easier to do than like a statue, like less of an investment, is maybe even more noticeable. But yeah, that would be cool. So maybe the city of Lowell will do something like that, and maybe Marlborough would too. I think Marlborough deserves some credit for hosting him. Like we talked about Harry Huff, he and his teammates did not want to play Lew. They tried to put up that color wall, that barrier to playing him, but most of the rest of the league supported him. They played with him willingly, and most of the fans did too. So I think it's great that it starts in Lowell, and I think it should, but I think there's a lot of other like towns and cities that are part of that history as well.
Was the pushback or resistance, like you mentioned, some teams that didn't want to play against him, was there any like bureaucratic obstacles thrown at him?
No, and actually the opposite. So when Harry Huff had refused to play him that game, and Lew even voluntarily sat, because he feared, it seems like, that there was going to be a riot, because that game was in Haverhill, and his team's fans were very upset that the other team wouldn't play while he was out there. The league held an emergency meeting after the game, and they decided that there would be no color line. They fined Natick $500. They threatened to expel them from the league if they did that again. So he actually, in the New England League anyway, had administrative support. I don't know what would have happened if he tried to go out on that Midwestern tour and get into an AAU tournament. Maybe that's where there would have been some administrative pushback. I don't know, like due to that injury, it wasn't really an option. But at any rate, when there was that pushback from players, the league supported him. There are other accounts where fans were giving him a hard time, and referees stopped the game and said, if you continue that, we're not going to play. There may be other accounts where that didn't happen and he didn't have the support and the newspapers didn't report on it. That's also possible as well. You didn't necessarily know everything that happened. A reporter might not have included in his account something that didn't reflect well on his city. But there are certainly several examples of Lew getting support from kind of the people that were running the leagues.
What kind of money did they make the pro players back then?
So there was a salary cap in the New England League, $5 a game, which is about $175 these days. So some money, but certainly not enough to live on. Like someone like Harry Huff was playing for a lot of different teams, like all the time. So that would be how he earned his living over the winter. But then during the summer, when there was no basketball, he would have like a regular job. So Bucky Lew played basketball a lot, up to 4 to 5 nights a week when he had his independent team and then his league team as well. But he also had that family business that he was helping to support. Now, the whole family was working there, so my sense is he was working there on kind of a part-time basis, but it certainly wasn't enough money to sustain yourself year-round. But it's only really fairly recently that you can make a living for basketball. Like Tommy Heinsohn, when he played in the 60s, he was selling insurance on the side.
Right.
Right.
So it actually is a pet peeve of mine when people refer to this as semi-pro basketball, because by that standard, the Celtics were a semi-pro team in the 60s.
And in the 70s, Dave Collins drove a cab
That's right, yeah, I
to
heard that.
supplement
Yeah.
his income.
Yeah, so it's only very recently that people have a career in basketball where that's their entire means of support.
Were there promoters making money off of it, or sponsors, or?
Yeah, so the structure was a lot flatter in those days. So basically the owner was kind of the manager running the show. So Jimmy Gray, who I talked about a few times in Lowell, he was the owner, manager, promoter. Like he would, so gambling was illegal in those days, but they probably promoted it even more than they do now. So he was promoting his team, talking to the papers, encouraging fans to come out with money because a bunch of other fans from the other team were gonna come down. So they would promote it through like newspapers, like in those ways. So certainly, yeah, Jimmy Gray was making money. So if the players are on a salary cap of $5 and Jimmy Gray gets 2,000 people to pay 35 cents to fill his arena, he's making way more than $5, right? He's also taking the risk. If no one shows up, then he's losing money. But he had a diamond pinky ring. He used to wear fancy clothes. I don't know. I've never seen any reference to what his profession was. I don't think he had a real job. His father was like a bigwig at City Hall, so I think he was, somehow money was funneling down to him. But at any rate, yeah, so people were like making money off of the sport other than just the players.
And did they have corporate sponsors? I mean, nobody's giving them sneakers, right?
So that's interesting. So have you heard of Ayers sarsaparilla? So this was like almost like a soda. It was like a health tonic or something from like the 19-teens. So they had sponsored a basketball team, and people were made fun of them for it. So this would have been after Major Taylor. So it wasn't like the first sponsorship, but there was a sponsor. They had like an article, not an article, but maybe it was a mural on the side of their building, or maybe it was in a magazine where it's like, this team drinks Ayers sarsaparilla. I have seen ads for More Shoe sneakers, which were sneakers that had like suction cups on the bottom because they played on very slippery floors. I mentioned how they played on some dance floors. Sometimes they're playing on like bowling alley floors. So there were some sponsorships, but not a lot. I mean, one of the teams, so I mentioned there were two teams from Lowell in those early days. One was the Burks, which was an Irish team. They were named after, they were sponsored by the Burke's Temperance Institute, which was named after an Irish priest, Father Burke, who was like an anti-alcohol crusader. So I don't know that they were making money off of it, but they were helping to publicize that team. That said, they dropped out really fast when they saw how violent the game was and some of the headlines that their teams were generating, like fistfights, concussions, lost teeth. So that team didn't stay in Lowell very long. They ended up going up to Manchester when someone up there agreed to kind of like bankroll them. All right, so I think that's it. So I appreciate your kind of patience listening to me, and I appreciate all the questions. That was very interactive. So appreciate you coming out tonight and hearing about Bucky Lew. I do have books if you want them. I'll just sell them at cost, which is $15, or you can just go Google and see what's out there for free. I've definitely published a fair amount of stuff. Just trying to get the word out about Lew.